Angelo. This 1-hour meeting is an important part of our annual budget planning outreach to the community. It's being recorded and will be posted on our city website for those that are unable to join us this evening. So as you know, the city continues to face the challenges due to the COVID-19 pandemic with a priority on maintaining essential city services and keeping our community healthy and safe. We thank the voters for Sales Tax Measure F, which certainly has helped. However, we still have a $3 million shortfall, and we are seeking your input as to your most important priorities, including which city services you would like preserved. So next slide, please. So this first slide covers the topics for tonight, including the budget calendar and process, city council priority areas, the fiscal year 2022 through 2031 10-year general fund financial forecast, and community engagement and survey results, and some time at the end for questions and discussion. Next slide. The city's budget is the most important annual policy document of the City Council. It addresses all the essential services to operate a full service city, including all the work that occurs in the areas of public safety, public works, community development, community services, finance, and administrative support. The budget represents the city's priorities, aligns available resources with community needs, and it serves as our financial plan for the fiscal year. I'd also like to mention the budget process includes effective participation from our mayor and the city council, our Milpitas community, and our city staff. So with that said, I'd like to hand the presentation over to Deputy City Manager Walter Rossman.
Thank you, Steve. Good evening. Walter Rossman, former Finance Director, now Deputy City Manager. So next slide, please. So we will look at the budget calendar for a few moments. Next slide, please. This is the process we take annually to go from the kickoff by the council in January, and as well with the community survey, all the way to the end of June, when we actually ask the council to have a public hearing about the budget and budget adoption. But there are many steps in between. We started here with open town hall budget survey, which we're going to talk about today, as well as community meetings. We have one today, and we have one on April 1st. Then we have the preliminary budget session, which happens on January 26th. That's when the council kicked it off. February 11th, we had the capital improvement study session. So that's the one we decide, or the council looks at recommendations from the city manager on how to invest dollars into capital improvements in our infrastructure for maintenance and repair and for new infrastructure. March 11th, that's today, the community budget meeting. That's the second one I put first, which I mentioned. The master fee schedule, those are the fees which you pay when you request a regulatory permit, when you request to get a building permit processed by the city. So there's a specific study session for the council to consider those fees, and then which will be later adopted on May 4th. The operating budget, which your input here today will help us put this together, starts on May 11th. We release the budget sometimes early May for the council to look at for about a week plus. And then they'll discuss in the study session the major changes to the budget, how we try to submit a balanced budget to them, or when we submit a balanced budget to the council, and for deliberation also with the public. So this is an important meeting to weigh in if you're interested in what the council decides regarding the budget initially, and then when they make the final decision, June 1st at the public hearing. Next slide, please. So the council set certain priority areas. Next slide, please. There are 7 of total of those, and they really encompass all the services which we provide to you as our residents. It starts off with community wellness. It's our parks and amenities which we provide, the classes we provide to you, which you can attend in the senior center or youth classes or in the sports center. Then one thing which is important to the council is economic development and job growth. How can we be a balanced city where we have housing, but we also have jobs available to our residents close by so they don't have to commute that far? Given the climate change which we have, environment is another priority for the council. And obviously we need to govern our city well. And so governance administration, how can we streamline processes, be cost effective, have long-term fiscal discipline, and financial stewardship is an important factor for the council as well. Next slide, please. We're going to be ready for our housing sector. We have sufficient housing here, which is sometimes a competing factor to job growth. but also make sure that it's affordable, that the people who work here can also live here. And public safety, that we have the right both police and fire protection. So when you call 911, we are there for you within a certain time frame. And lastly, transportation and transit. That's just trying to make sure that we have sufficient multimodal transportation availability, public transit, but also have our streets in good repair. Next slide, please. So let's talk about a little bit about the city services and its funding sources. So what's our budget like? Where does the money come from? You can see, just click please. The majority of money comes from charges for services. It's about 30%. That's the utility bills you pay. That's the solid waste bill, the sewer bills you pay. That's when you pay a class in the recreation center or community center or senior center. The second biggest funding source is property tax. The city receives, click please. Property tax is about 17% of our share of the total revenues. And it's we get a portion of the 1% you're paying for property tax, and we'll show later on the slide how much the city gets versus how much of the property tax you pay go to other agencies locally. Next click, please. And the third one is sales tax. Sales tax is the 9.2.5% which you pay. This includes Measure F, and then we'll talk a little bit later about Measure F as well. But it's our third largest funding source. Next slide, please. So how do we spend our money? The majority goes into staff. And the reason why it's staff, we are service-driven, click please, a service-driven organization. We provide our services through public safety, through fire and police, through utility workers, making sure your water hookers, the water is delivered to you, as well as through your parks are maintained. Next click please. The next biggest piece is non-personal expenditures. You think it's pretty large, but the reason why it's so large is really includes the water which we purchase from the Santa Clara County Water District or from the San Francisco Public Utility Commission. It's a large portion of the expenditure here, which we then sell back to you as our residents and utility customers. Click, please. And the third biggest expenditure is capital improvements. These are the dollars we spend in making sure that our utility infrastructure is in place, our parks get built, our roads get properly maintained, etc. Next slide, please. So since we're a service-driven organization, you might wonder where the biggest number of people are employed in which department. Well, the biggest one is public safety, and it's starting with police, and then fire. And thirdly is public works. So you can see this where we have the most employees working for you in those areas, making sure that we provide the proper services to you. Next slide, please. So this is an interesting paragraph to look at. It has two scales. On the left-hand side, you have number of positions, or FTEs, full-time equivalent positions. As you can see in the fiscal year 08-09, that's about 13 years or so ago, we had close to 500 positions. The population at the time, that's the yellow line, was approximately, let me just have to move my picture here, approximately about 70,000, 75,000 people. So over the years, we had several economic recessions, Great Recession, which most of us experienced, the redevelopment agency resolution that was enacted by the state, with the redevelopment agency in the city, which was very active in making sure that we have economic development happening. And now we have the pandemic. And while our position count dropped drastically to 300 FTEs, increased over the last few years, and we're down to about 420 positions right now, population increased. We are about 84,000 or so in population, and well, while we reduced our staffing, we have more people served with the staff complement which we have, number of staff which we have. Next slide, please. So property and sales tax. I mentioned that these are the biggest funding sources, second and third largest actually, for all funds, for all the funds which we have as funding source. But the biggest fund which we have, which pays for your police, fire, your parks and recreation classes, your streets, and the land use, those two funding, so those activities are funded by the general fund. And the general fund is supported through general taxes. And the biggest two taxes which we have is property tax and sales tax. And the second part, the third largest revenue source for the general fund are your fees which you pay for services, whether it's planning fees, building fees, or recreation fees. So this makes up how we, in essence, fund those services such as police and fire. Next slide, please. But you may wonder, you pay when you go to the mall or you go downtown to a shop for $100, you pay in a purchase, which is the sales tax payment as well, $9.25 you pay in sales tax. But the city does not get $9.25. The majority is $6 or 6 percentage points go to the state. Then you have a big percentage which goes to transit measures, which the voters have approved in the county over the years. And the city gets $1 on a $100 purchase. And with Measure F, an extra 25 cents. Measure F, as the city manager mentioned, really helped us to weather this pandemic, the economic impact of the pandemic we are currently experiencing. So the city, in sum, gets $1.25 of the $9.25 taxes which you pay on $100 purchase. So we get a portion of that, small portion. Next slide, please. With property tax, it's very similar. So property tax is assessed by the county. They determine how much property tax we have to, how much property tax payment we pay. But the property tax is 1% of the value of your property. As you can see, the city gets about 16% of that payment which you make. So if you're $100,000 is worth your property, you pay $1,000 in property tax. Of this, about $162 go to the city. $400 close to go to the school districts, K through 12. These are the other areas as well. The county gets a portion, county school service, community colleges, et cetera, and special districts. Next slide, please. So now you have a better understanding how revenues get generated. It's primarily for taxes and general fund, what the general fund pays, and why this is important to have a balanced budget. It's a balanced budget because if we don't have enough revenue, then we have to cut expenditure services to our community, which is not what we plan to do. And then your review of your priorities, as outlined by the council, the 7 priority areas, will help us understand what's most important to you. So let's look at how we're doing for next fiscal year. Next slide, please. So the way we kick off the budget process in the sales and the budget count, initially on January 26th, we kicked it off with the council. We look at the forecast. We need to know where financially we're going. We decide to do a 10-year financial forecast based on certain factors, which cost factors, which we wanted to make sure we incorporate into the forecast. Additionally, you will see this later, Measure F sunsets in 8 years, and want to see the impact of this of the additional taxes which we get, and plan for a sunset in about 8 years by 28-29 fiscal year. The forecast is also a tool to see where the behavior of the folks who pay our taxes is expected to be. And what I'm looking at is the travel industry. And will the business community come back and travel as much as the pre-pandemic, given the restrictions, number one, for travel, which are short-term, but long-term, will people feel comfortable stepping into a plane, staying in a hotel, and visiting our city? So therefore, assumption is in this forecast, we don't think this will happen. So we have a permanent reduction in transient occupancy tax as part of the major revenue assumptions in the forecast. The way we develop revenues, they're data-driven. We look at historical data. We work with consultants who understand sales tax very well and property tax. We talk to Economic Development Office and see what they see in the horizon. Look at the planning department. Where do you see new buildings getting built or getting planning permits getting submitted? And it comes down to what has happened in the past and the experience which we have as finance professionals in order to determine the forecast and the revenues in the forecast. Expenditures is easier. We have certain factors with labor agreements we have with our employees or bargaining units, and we understand the cost factors for infrastructure, for operations, etc. And we escalate it out to a reasonable CPI or consumer price index. Next slide, please. So the forecast in January 26 didn't look very good. You might recall we had just a second lockdown at this time, maybe even the third one in California. It just happened right after Christmas. And we realized our taxes were plunging even further than we expected. So the first one is the amended budget, which is the fiscal year we currently have. The council, in the meantime, rebalanced this budget. We have basically balanced. We have no deficit this fiscal year anymore through various methods and options which they took. Including reducing positions and reducing temporary salaries, etc. So then we looked in January at the shortfall for about $7.5 million, and you can see the entire forecast, all red numbers and deficits. Next slide, please. Graphically represented, you'll see that over the next 10 years, expenditures outpace revenues. You'll see that about 28, 29, this big kink downwards, those are the sources or the revenues to the city. And they're dropping substantially because we expect Measure F not to be renewed at this time. So with that, the gap in the next 8-9 years is going to be larger than we're experiencing today. But let's focus on today. We have a shortfall of $7.5 million to resolve. Next slide, please. I should maybe tell you in a second. We'll talk in a second where we are today, give a certain actions council set and what is left with the deficit to be resolved. And as Steve mentioned, it's about $3 million. Just a short summary here. What's important is that we have an aging infrastructure, public safety building, storm drain system. We're going through a parks master plan right now. But there's a high need on infrastructure. That's currently not in the forecast. We don't have any funding sources for rebuilding our buildings, rebuilding our storm drain system, or adding more parks, or maybe other amenities the residents would like to have. So we need to figure out the next few years how we're going to how we develop a funding mechanism for replacing the infrastructure. The other thing is happening, BART Station and Milpitas Transit Center open up. We don't know what the impact is from a service perspective. Do we need more police services around the transit center, other services which we may need? So that's currently not included in the forecast. And the last bullet, which is the most important, is really, we don't know where the economy is going to go. It's looking better, vaccination is going to happen, but the forecast you're showing you today may have to change in the short term at least, if indeed revenues don't come back as quickly as we anticipate. Next slide, please. So this was the deficit on January 26, which you shared with the council. And based on the deficit, council set certain actions that were very strong and say, we need to have, when you come back to us at mid-year, that's the rebalancing of the current year budget that happened on February 16. We need to have a way of not just addressing this year's balancing of this year's budget and deficit, which we resolved, but also what can we do for next fiscal year? How can we set ourselves up fiscally in a strong fashion so we can resolve this budget deficit of $7.5 million? And that's what we did. The council reduced 14 positions and established a future deficit reserve. Savings from this year will be allocated towards next year. Next slide, please. So if you're looking at $3 million, the forecast looks very different than what you saw before. If we basically resolve the shortfalls of $3 million for next fiscal year and $1.6 million for the following year, we're looking at a slight surplus in 23-24. If we structurally make changes, so what I mean with it, we reduce ongoing expenditures, such as more position reductions, then we look much better in the following years. Next slide, please. So you may wonder, well, what have you done? I've known about this pandemic for the last 12 months. We have learned about the impacts eventually as soon as we got data in. And we worked very hard to basically reduce expenditures without necessarily impacting services. That was most important for the council. We looked at personnel cost reductions. We looked at non-personal expenditure reductions. The council put a ballot measure, which the voters thankfully approved. And 4 of our 6 bargaining units decided to forego their wage increase, which was part of the labor contract. They opened up the labor contract, and we saved $2.4 million there. As you can see at the bottom line, we still have $3 million left to go. Next slide, please. So now you're wondering, $3 million, how do you go about this? How do we decide to cut the service here, cut a position there? What's the process we undergo? That's something which we want to definitely share with you here today. Well, first of all, It's informed by you, the community, participants like in this workshop here today, by the council, and by employee engagement. It is driven by the council priorities. So we mentioned that we did a survey about early January or mid-January, and what the question came up: what is most important to you? Public safety, sustainability, governance, economic development. The council, as we were in the midst of the crisis, we realized the pandemic is not going to go away in 6 months. The council adopted fiscal response strategies and guidelines, and these guide us as well. The fiscal policies, which are very strong in the reserve policy side. The council, in the good years, put a lot of money on the side for future expenditures for various reasons, and so those are fiscal policies guide us in this aspect. Budget guidelines, how do we put the budget together? If you're interested in ever reading those, I invite you to go to the website, look for finance, look for the budget document, and you can read the fiscal policies, which are covered, which the city uses, and the budget guidelines we use to put this budget together. And there's best practices, something we as professionals have done with other cities, or I've learned over the years, which we use as well to balance this $3 million shortfall, which we currently still have. Next slide, please. Short, so these are the bullets which we shared with the council just recently, how we're going to plan to bring this budget, the balanced budget, to them in early May. Well, we're going to have a strategic mix of short-term and long-term staffing reductions. What we mean with that is certain departments respond differently to the pandemic and the post-pandemic environment than others do. So how can we align the expected service demand which we have with the staffing which we need? How can we streamline our processes? How can we take advantage of technology, which we have done already? And then lastly, beyond tax increases, which the voters have to approve, there's some areas for new revenues which we may be able to implement to also offset certain costs which we incur. Next slide, please. So I'm finished for now with my presentation, and I'll invite Ashwini Kantak, Assistant City Manager, to speak about the city's capital improvement program.
Thank you, Walter. Good evening, everyone. And I'm going to speak to the capital improvement program. If we can go to the next slide, please. So what is a CIP? So our city, like most other full-service cities, owns and maintains a significant amount of physical assets, including parks, streets, city buildings, fleet, as well as utilities like water, sewer, and storm. And so the capital improvement program is really a 5-year infrastructure planning and budget document. It's also sometimes referred to as a capital budget. And what this does is it allows us to proactively plan for upgrades, repairs, as well as replacement of our aging infrastructure. It also allows us to deliver the services in accordance with council priorities that Walter just talked about. And we can do this by, again, planning ahead, managing and appropriating necessary funds and resources for these projects. And most importantly, through the CIP, we can ensure that the city implements and prioritizes projects in a timely manner to make the city safe, livable, and a sustainable city. Next slide, please. So the proposed 5-year CIP includes 132 projects that are estimated at over $210 million. In the next fiscal year, we have about 33 projects at over $22 million that are planned. The projects in the CIP, they're grouped in kind of 6 categories. So community improvements, and that can include all kinds of things like city facilities and a variety of other infrastructure that sort of is a catch-all. Then we have our parks, which are very important and enjoyed by the community. Streets and roads infrastructure, as well as all the utilities. As I mentioned, we are a full service city, so we own and operate our utilities. So we have our water system, sanitary sewer system, as well as the storm system. And funding for these capital projects actually comes from a variety of sources. So utility rates for all the 3 utility infrastructure projects. From the general fund, we also collect a lot of impact fees from developers when projects are built because of the impacts they have on our infrastructure. We get gas tax, a variety of grants, as well as other federal, state, and regional allocations, which may be as a result of a local measure that was passed for streets. And so for the next fiscal year of the estimated $22 million in costs, project costs, we only have $3 million coming from the general fund. The remaining $19 million actually come from these other funding sources. Now, one of the things I did want to note on this slide is when you see the $210 million over the 5 years, note that over $70 million is actually not funded. So projects in the first year of the 5-year CIP are funded fully, and then projects in the remaining 4 years, there are projects that either have partial funding or no funding. And this is something that Walter talked about, that we have a lot of infrastructure needs and kind of continually need to plan to fund those with different revenue sources. And we have already discussed this proposed CIP at a council study session in February. We also presented it to 2 of our commissions, so planning commissions, as well as our parks, Recreation and Cultural Resources Commission. And the CIP is slated for approval ahead of the operating budget. We're going to council on April 6th. So if you're interested in listening to more detail about the projects planned, please feel free to attend that. And we also have it on our website. Next slide, please. And this is a slide, again, talking to our needs on the infrastructure side. We have, beyond the 5 years, we also have $171 million in funding. So this is the one that I talked about, the 70 million. And then beyond that, we also have almost $172 million in funding needs. Examples include for our fire stations, which again are aging, so they need major rehab or replacement. Many of our parks need rehabilitation, as well as streets need continual investment, and our utility infrastructure as well. So again, in these 6 categories, we, as I mentioned, we have 22 projects, 33 projects for the next fiscal year, and happy to answer questions about them in the Q&A, but for now, we'll keep it at a high level. And if we can go on to the next slide. So I'm going to start off this section on community engagement. So as Walter talked about, we are a service-based organization. If you can go to the next slide. So our budget is really all about the level and types of services we provide to the community. And so it's really important for us to hear directly from the community. We do this through a variety of channels, including community meetings, surveys, and public hearings. And so I'm going to hand it off now to our Public Information Officer, Charmaine Angelo, to tell you more about all of the outreach we have been doing. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Again, my name is Charmaine Angelo. I'm the Public Information Officer with the city. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk to you about the community engagement initiatives that we have implemented, some of it still ongoing. Next slide, please. As some of you may have heard, the city seeks the services of FM3 for an annual community survey. This is the 3rd year in a row that we have worked with them in gathering public opinion and feedback from Milpitas residents. We interviewed a total of 795 adult residents from the city. Our research ran from January 5th to the 20th. And our recruitment methods included telephone calls, email invites, and postcards. And we gathered information through telephone interviews and online surveys. The research was conducted in several languages, including English, Spanish, Chinese, and Vietnamese. On February 16, FM3 provided a deep dive presentation to City Council, but tonight I'm happy to share highlights of our survey results. Next slide, please. So it's so heartwarming to learn that Milpitas residents are overwhelmingly in agreement about the city's strong sense of diversity and inclusion. 79% are content with their quality of life. 87% agree that diversity is an asset. 83% feel that diversity is embraced and very much celebrated. 82% agree that Milpitas is a wonderful place to raise a family. and 80% associate living in the city with a sense of pride. But the last data point that you see on the slide is notable because 77% recommend Milpitas to others as a place to live. So when you think about it, our residents are endorsing and promoting our city to others for free. Next slide, please. Now, I would like to share top-line information that showcases the high approval ratings for our city's public safety priority areas, fire and police at 89% and 81% respectively. Additionally, it's also notable that majority of the residents approve of the city's response to the coronavirus pandemic. We take pride in being the first city in the county, in Santa Clara County, to issue a mask order, and also are very proud to be the only city in the county to create an innovative mobile testing unit utilizing a fire department ambulance as a testing base. Lastly, you'll note that we have an 80% average in satisfaction ratings in the categories of police protection, 911 response, traffic enforcement, and park maintenance. Next slide, please. Just wanted to talk to you about key takeaways on this slide. So public opinion about life in Milpitas continues to be very positive and mirrors what we have seen in the past year. As mentioned earlier, residents are very proud of the city and consider it a very great place to live and raise a family. However, there is mixed opinion and perceptions about the city being an exciting and affordable one. And also interesting to note in the survey results is that a small percentage of our residents disapprove of the city's services and policies on affordable housing and homelessness. And lastly, public opinion about the city's fast growth has steadily declined in the past 3 years. And as I've mentioned earlier, public safety and public works are top priority areas. Next slide. So part of our community engagement is an open town hall survey, which we recently launched on March 5. We've asked participants questions associated with the prioritization of council priority areas. Due to potential service cuts, we want to know what matters most to you, our community members. Next slide, please. So we invite you to take our survey. It's on the city website. It's essentially our city website /budget survey. The survey will be available until April 30th, and you can choose to keep your responses anonymous, but we would really like to invite and encourage you to tell us what our budget priorities should be. Next slide. So this concludes our presentation, and now we'd like to open the floor to any of your questions.
I don't see any virtual hands raised, so we'll give it a couple of minutes. If you have questions, please raise your virtual hand and we'll call on you. And for those who may be watching through Facebook Live or YouTube, we will have another community meeting on April 1st, as we mentioned, if you'd like to attend and ask questions. We will also record this session and have it available on our website. If you are not able to join, or if others who are not able to watch today, they can go ahead and watch the presentation. Okay, I don't see any hands, so we must have provided all the information they were looking for. Thank you, Walter, Charmaine, and we take this opportunity to maybe introduce our new finance director. Lauren, if you want to just unmute yourself, we wanted to welcome Lauren Lai, who just joined us this week. And we're excited to have her on board. She's our new finance director, and maybe at the next meeting, we'll be partly leading the presentation. So Lauren, you want to say a few words?
Great. Thanks so much for the opportunity to say hello to this wonderful community. It's my pleasure to be here. I started this week. I come to the city from the city of Monterey. And prior to that, I have a total of 25 years of experience, 15 years of which in local government as finance director for 3 cities, Capitola, Marina, and Monterey. So I'm really excited to be here to join this leadership team and serve this wonderful community. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you. Steve, you want to say anything? If not, we'll.
Yeah, just thank you for attending, and hopefully, I'm sure many of the community members will be able to see this in a recorded fashion. So we'll have it posted for you, and I think we'll just sign off. Have a good evening.
Yes, have a good evening, everyone. Thank you.